Can you introduce yourself?
Oh, I'm Jim McCrum, Clary's grandfather,
Okay. What year were you born?
1943.
Okay. When and where did you get married?
In Detroit in 1966, February 5th, 1966.
Okay. Can you explain in detail about what did you know about MLK and the civil rights movement?
MLK? MLK, he led the civil rights, but when he led it, it was on the peaceful side. But there was some radical side that he went over and tried to keep them down. He was shot in Memphis, Tennessee, I believe. And in October, was it
I think it was
1968, 65?
Yeah, it's 68, I think.
68.
Do you remember the March on Washington?
Yeah, it was his speech.
Mhm.
That was in August of 63.
Mhm.
And I had a dream. I have a dream.
Yeah.
That was his speech. It was pretty good.
What do you remember about? Do you remember about Malcolm X and the Black Panthers and the more violent side of the civil rights movement?
Yeah, that they were radicals, and they were no good. They just wanted to kill all the white people.
Mm.
And there was White Panthers.
Black Panthers?
Black Panthers?
Yeah.
And there's another one in there too. I forget. Her name was Davis. She's a professor now. What's her name? She was part of that Black Panther or the Angela Davis. She was one of the radicals. Now she's a professor in California.
Mm.
Professor of law.
Yeah. What do you remember about the assassinations of JFK?
JFK?
Yeah.
When JFK got assassinated, which was in November of 63,
Mhm.
I was at work. I was talking to one of our clients, our customers, and she was from Copper's company. I don't know her name. I remember the company. She was from Copper's company. And we had music in the elevator music, they called it. Nobody ever talked, just strictly elevator music. And then they broke in. They said, President Kennedy has just been shot in Dallas. And I says, what did they say? And she says, what do you mean, what did they say? I said, on the radio they broke in and said that Kennedy was shot. And she says, no, it can't be. But the rest of the office heard it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they were in tears and everything else. And I turned around, and then they just shut the switchboard down. This was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And they shut the switchboard off, and everybody went home. A lot of girls were crying and everything.
What job did you have at the time?
Oh, I worked for Grand Trunk Warehouse. I was an order clerk. This was 3 months before I went in the Army.
Cool. Okay, what do you remember about the assassination of Robert Kennedy?
Yeah, Kennedy, he was running for president. He was in California. And the guy that shot him his name was Sirhan. And he, it seems to me like he shot him in the kitchen while he was, right after a speech. And Sirhan shot him in the kitchen while he was leaving. And he was they thought that that Bobby Kennedy had a pretty good chance of becoming president because he was a president of JFK that got shot a couple of years prior to that. And at the time, I believe he was Attorney General.
Mm. What did you think about Lyndon B. Johnson as a president?
Bad.
Bad?
Yeah. He, although he was in my chain of command when I was in the Army, I didn't like him then either. Anyway, he was from Texas. And the only reason he got vice president, or one of the reasons, is because he was from the South. He was from Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And Kennedy was from was in Massachusetts, and he had to get some Southern votes.
Mm-hmm.
So he shot. So he didn't shoot him.
He picked.
Yeah, he selected him as VP.
Yeah. What do you remember about the Detroit riots?
Oh, that's closer. Detroit riots happened in July of '67.
Mm-hmm.
Cheryl and I were just married. We didn't have any kids. We were at my mom and dad's house in Orchard Lake. And it was on a Sunday. And we were going home, and on the radio, we learned that Detroit wasn't shut down, the curfew, because of riots. This is the first we heard of it. Well, we only lived one block inside of Detroit. So I went around to get to that one block,
Mm-hmm.
to get to our house. But the police stopped us
Mm.
and escorted us to our home.
Really?
But it was something else. The riots themselves were sad. There was people that were arrested coming in from Chicago. And there was one mayor, his name was Orville Hubbard. He was Mayor of Dearborn.
Mm-hmm.
And I-94 was a straight line from Detroit to Chicago. And anybody with Chicago or Illinois plates coming through Dearborn, he had them arrested.
Mm-hmm.
And especially if they were black. He had them arrested because he didn't want them in the riots or anything.
Yeah.
His name was Orville Hubbard.
What street did you live on? Like, where did you live in Detroit?
I was born and raised at 5960 Field Avenue in the Harper and Van Dyke area.
What was your first job?
My first job?
Yeah.
You mean after high school?
Yeah.
It was a Grand Trunk warehouse.
Really?
I got, now that's funny. Funny, to me, how I got the job.
How'd you get the job?
Pardon? You want to know?
How'd you get the job, yeah?
Well, it was at a gas station up there on Gratiot and Connor, a golf gas station. I was pumping gas for my car. I had an old 54 Chevy.
Mm-hmm.
And on the other side was a brand new Cadillac. And I didn't know his name at the time, but there was three guys. This is back when people at the gas station, they come and check your gas and oil and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And, well, anyway, I asked his name. I didn't know his name. I asked him what the problem was. He says, I don't know anything about these cars. He says, the only thing I know is how to get them and drive them. And he was about 60, 65 years old at the time. And he had black suit, dressed up to go someplace. And anyway, I says, well, why won't it start? He says, I don't know. and I asked the guy, I said, was it getting spark? And he said, yeah, you can see it. It's getting spark. And I said, gas? He said, yeah, you can smell the gas. I said, well, it's got to be in the timing then. He says, there's no reason for it not to start if you've got spark and gas. He says, there's nothing wrong with the time. I said, how do you know? Anyway, I had Mr. Lamping told the guy to go in there and get a 7/16 inch wrench. And then I told Mr. Lamping to get in. And when I told him to crank it up, crank it, and I turned that distributor a little bit. And pretty soon it started.
Mm-hmm.
And so I tightened that 7/16 inch down. And I told Mr. Lamping, I says, if you get a chance to get it scoped out, what they call a sun scope. I says, but don't do it here. These guys don't know what they're doing. And well, anyway, I asked, see, you really must be somebody of a big shot of a company owning a car like this. He said, yeah, he's not president of Grand Trunk Warehouse. And I said, well, is Grand Trunk Warehouse doing any hiring? He says, no, not now. He says, but they will in 2 weeks. So he gave me his card. He asked me why, and I said, well, I have a brother, which was my brother Buddy. He's had stroke of bad luck. And I says, well, the economy itself was bad anyway. And he gave me his card. He says, tell him to come and see me in 2 weeks. Mary, I won't have an appointment, but Mary is my secretary. All you do is show her this card. It'll be all right. He pulled out of the driveway, and then he stopped, backed up. He said, well, what's your brother doing Monday? I was probably looking for a job. He says, well, you send him down there. Take that card and send him down to my office. And then he asked, what is he I told him whatever I knew, I learned from him about cars. He says, well, you make sure you send him down there Monday. And then he hired him on the spot. And then I was still in high school. And he kept on asking Buddy every time he saw Buddy, in the cafeteria, where am I? He says, well, great, he's got he said, you send him down here. So anyway, I went down there, and Grand Trunk Warehouse had dry storage, freezer, dry cooler, and everything else, things. And I hit them all, inbound, outbound, track, every place. And this was in June of '62. I started out there. About November, I got laid off because turkey season was over, and that turkey season for Thanksgiving and everything else. And that place was flooded with turkeys from Swift. And I got laid off. Then he called me right before Christmas, and of '62. He says, "What are you doing?" I was, I answered the phone. He says, "Do you know who this is?" And I said, "No." I said, "You sound a lot like Mr. Lamping." He said, "Well, I am Mr. Lamping." He says, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I was out looking for a job." He says, "Would you mind coming back to me, working for Grand Trunk?" And I says, "Yeah, but," I said, "I worked every department there was you guys had, and I don't think any of your foremen like me." Because I went from the department, and he says, "No, I told them to." I wanted somebody in his office that knew what was happening in the warehouse. He said, "Would you come?" So I went back there, and I worked for him before I got, not for, for Grand Trunk, before I went in the Army.
And why did you go in the Army?
I got drafted.
You got drafted?
Right, I didn't have to do a choice.
I thought you enlisted. I didn't know you got drafted.
Pardon?
I thought you enlisted. I didn't know you got drafted.
No, they to get in the army now you join, but back then you didn't want to do. You got drafted, but they cut the draft out.
Do you remember what your draft number was?
Yeah, US 55771629.
What did you do in the army?
I was basic in Fort Knox.
Mm-hmm.
Then that was 10 weeks down there. Then I took 10 weeks, what they call AIT, Advanced Individual Training, on the Warhead and Nike Hurt missile. Then I got stationed on Belle Isle
Mm-hmm.
at a Nike Herc site. A lot of people didn't know that there was a Nike site in Belle Isle because it was back on the eastern end of the island, but it was there.
What's Nike?
Nike Herc, Nike Hercules.
What is that?
It was fast back then. I don't know what it is now, but it was bring sound aircraft,
Oh.
everything. And I was in there for 2 years, but I was taught in Texas. But I got promoted to engineering
Mm.
for generators and everything. And
Yeah,
that was it.
that was it. What were your feelings about the Vietnam War?
I didn't like it. I didn't fully understand it, but what I understood of it, I didn't like it. It was a political war from our end, and from what I read of and everything else, if we would have stayed another 2 or 3 weeks, we would have won that war decisively.
Mm.
But I didn't agree with it.
No.
There's a lot of people, that got drafted. Went over to Canada, right?
Mm.
But see, when I was in, actually, the United States didn't actually start fighting in the war till March of '65.
Mm-hmm.
We were there as advisors to teach them how to fight.
Mm-hmm.
But apparently they weren't picking up fighting enough. We had to go in there and teach them how to fight. And Cheryl and I, we were engaged 2 or 3 times. And one of the times we weren't engaged, I got disgusted and excuse me.